The weapon they don't want you to know about. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean right now, a US Navy warship is being stalked. Not by another ship, not by a submarine, by a missile, traveling faster than the speed of sound, skimming just meters above the water's surface, heading straight for the hull. The crew has less than 4 seconds to respond. And here's what's terrifying. They don't have to. Because before that missile gets anywhere near the ship, something fires back. Something autonomous. Something that doesn't need a human to pull a trigger. And by the time the incoming threat even registers on a radar screen, it's already been destroyed. That weapon is called SeaRAM. And the fact that you've probably never heard of it is exactly by design. But to understand why SeaRAM exists, you first have to understand just how desperate the threat became. The problem nobody wanted to admit. For decades, the US Navy ruled the seas without serious challenge. Its warships were the most advanced in the world, and any adversary that threatened them paid a catastrophic price. Then, something changed. In the late 2000s and into the 2010s, adversary nations, China, Russia, Iran, began developing a new class of weapons, anti-ship missiles. Not slow, lumbering rockets, but precision-guided, supersonic, sea-skimming threats, specifically engineered to do one thing: sink American warships before they even knew what hit them. These weren't theoretical concerns. Military analysts started crunching the numbers. In wargame after wargame, US surface ships were taking catastrophic hits. The gap between the threat and the defense was widening every year. The Navy had a close-in weapon system, known as CIWS, a Gatling-style cannon that fires 4,500 rounds per minute. But CIWS had a problem. It only worked if the threat got close enough. And against supersonic cruise missiles, close was already too late. The Navy needed something that could stop the threat further out. Something smarter, something faster, something that hadn't been built yet. So, they went back to 2 weapons that had already proven themselves, and merged them into something the world had never seen.
The secret fusion. 2 weapons become one. The idea sounds almost too simple. Take 2 systems the Navy already trusted completely, systems with proven track records, thousands of hours of real-world testing, already deployed across hundreds of ships, and fuse them together into a single, unified weapon. The first component, the Mk-15 Phalanx, better known as CIWS, a close-in defense system that had been guarding Navy ships since the Cold War. Reliable, lethal at close range, but limited. The second, the Rolling Airframe Missile, or RAM, a joint venture between the United States and Germany, installed on over 165 ships worldwide. Supersonic, agile, designed to chase down and destroy incoming threats at ranges far beyond any gun. Individually, both were formidable. Together, under the classified program that would eventually be called SeaRAM, they became something else entirely. Engineers at Raytheon Missile Systems spent years working out the integration. The challenge wasn't just hardware. It was making 2 systems that were designed independently communicate with each other in real.
Fire and forget. The autonomous kill machine. Here's where CRAM gets genuinely unsettling. Most weapons need a human in the loop. Someone watching a screen, making a decision, pressing a button. That chain of command, from sensor to shooter, takes time. And time, when a supersonic missile is inbound, is the one thing you don't have. CRAM doesn't wait for permission. The system uses what engineers call a dual-mode guidance design. The first mode is passive radio frequency detection. It locks onto the radar emissions coming from the incoming missile. The second is infrared, heat-seeking, because cruise missiles traveling at those speeds burn extraordinarily hot. Lock both signals together, and the RAM missile doesn't just track its target, It predicts where the target is going. It adjusts mid-flight. It cannot be shaken. Once fired, the Ram Block 2 missile, the interceptor at Cram's core, requires no further instruction from any human operator. You launch it, it hunts, it kills. Defense engineers call this fire and forget. What it really means is that Cram can engage multiple threats simultaneously without overloading a single operator. While one Ram missile is already mid-intercept, another can be launched at the next incoming threat, and another. The Mk-49 launcher holds 21 missile rounds. In a real-world saturation attack, the scenario military planners lose sleep over, that capacity isn't just useful.
Where SeaRAM is already hidden in plain sight. By the time most people started asking questions about SeaRAM, it was already everywhere. The system had been quietly installed across the Navy's littoral combat ship fleet, those fast, shallow water vessels designed to operate in environments too dangerous for larger ships. The trimaran hull Independence variant was first, then the flat-bottomed Freedom variant, starting with LCS-17. But SeaRAM didn't stay on small ships. The Navy integrated it onto destroyers, amphibious assault ships, aircraft carriers. And when the service began developing its new frigate program, a more survivable evolution of the LCS, SeaRAM was built into the design from the ground up. What made that significant wasn't the scale, it was the implication. Frigates are blue water warships. They operate far from shore in contested ocean environments, against adversaries with advanced anti-ship capabilities. Putting SeaRAM on a frigate isn't a defensive measure, it's a statement. It's the Navy telling potential adversaries, we can go where you think we can't, and we can survive what you think will stop us. Pentagon officials confirmed the system is now installed on over 165 ships worldwide, across multiple allied nations. Allies including Germany, the co-developer of the RAM missile, have deployed SeaRAM variants on their own vessels. The weapon that nobody was supposed to know about was quietly becoming one of the most widely deployed ship defense systems on the planet. And then came the test that proved it worked. Not in a simulation, but in the real world.
The live fire test that changed everything. The Ram Block 2 missile went through years of development testing before anyone outside the program was allowed to talk about it. Subsonic targets, supersonic targets, maneuvering threats, sea-skimming profiles. Every scenario military planners could construct. It passed all of them. But the moment that mattered, the moment that went on record, happened aboard LCS-2, a littoral combat ship operating off the coast during a live fire exercise. The target was an aerial drone, the kind of low, slow threat that anti-ship attacks increasingly rely on to overwhelm defenses. SeaRAM locked, fired, intercepted. Navy officials confirmed it as the first ever shipboard live firing of the SeaRAM system. They noted it had emerged from, in their words, extensive planning, assessment, modeling, and simulation. What they didn't say was how many times they ran those simulations before they trusted it enough to fire the real thing. The result? The drone never reached the ship. Since that test, SeaRAM has achieved what the military calls Initial Operational Capability, IOC, meaning it's not experimental anymore, it's real, it's deployed, and it's been quietly logging performance data ever since. Rick McDonald, Program Director of Close-End Defense Solutions at Raytheon, later said in an interview, SeaRAM will take out cruise missiles, maneuvering drones, and surface threats. What you gain is a layered defensibility and an independent radar, giving ships both situational awareness and increased range. Independent radar. That phrase matters more than it sounds. Because SeaRAM doesn't just add a missile, it adds an entirely new set of eyes, and that changes the tactical picture completely.
The kill chain, layers of death. To understand why CRAM matters at the strategic level, you have to understand how a modern Navy warship actually defends itself. It's not one weapon. It's never one weapon. It's a layered kill chain. Concentric rings of defense, each one designed to catch what the previous one missed. At the outermost ring, the SM-3 interceptor.
designed to kill ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere or even in space before they begin their terminal descent toward a ship. The SM-3 is the shot you take when the threat is still hundreds of miles out. Closer in, the SM-2 and SM-6, mid-range interceptors capable of engaging anti-ship missiles, aircraft, and maneuvering threats within a more conventional combat radius. Closer still, the evolved Sea-Sparrow missile, a precision interceptor for threats that survived the outer layers. Then, CRAM. Then, CIWS. Each layer exists because the previous one might fail. An adversary might saturate the SM-3 with decoys. A maneuvering missile might slip past the SM-6. The evolved Sea-Sparrow might be jammed. CRAM's job is to be the weapon that catches what everything else missed, at a range where failure is still survivable, before the threat enters the final deadly close-in envelope, where CIWS becomes the last resort. What makes CRAM uniquely valuable in this chain is its independence. It carries its own radar, its own software, its own...
The hidden strategy behind the weapon? CRAM didn't appear in a vacuum. It's a piece of a much larger strategic shift, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. For most of the 2000s and early 2010s, the US Navy was focused on things that didn't require blue water combat dominance. Counter-piracy operations, visit, board, search and seizure missions, counter-terrorism support. The Navy was busy, but it wasn't fighting the kind of adversary it had spent the Cold War preparing for. Then, the calculus changed. China began fielding carrier-killer missiles. Russia upgraded its naval strike capabilities. Iran demonstrated that relatively small, cheap weapons, drones, sea-skimming rockets, could threaten multi-billion-dollar warships. The Navy's response was a concept called distributed lethality. The idea? Stop concentrating all offensive and defensive power in a small number of large, expensive ships. Instead, arm every vessel, destroyers, frigates, LCS, with enough capability that any adversary who attacks any ship pays a devastating price. CRAM is the defensive half of that equation. A littoral combat ship with CRAM isn't just a patrol vessel anymore. It's a hardened combatant, capable of defending itself against the exact weapons that near-peer adversaries have designed specifically to sink it. Putting CRAM on a frigate extends the Navy's ability to operate in contested waters, the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf, the North Atlantic, without needing a carrier strike group nearby for protection. It's a quiet revolution in what a surface ship can absorb and survive. And the adversaries who've been tracking it know exactly what it means. Which brings us to the question nobody in the Pentagon will answer directly.
What they're still not telling you? Here's what we know. SeaRAM is real. It's deployed. It works. Over 165 ships carry some variant of it. The RAM Block II missile has achieved operational capability and has destroyed real targets in live tests. Here's what we don't know. What's the classified performance ceiling? Raytheon's public statements describe SeaRAM's capabilities in broad strokes, but the actual intercept success rates, the tested limits against the most advanced hypersonic threats, the electronic warfare resistance data, none of that is public. How does it perform against the latest Chinese and Russian anti-ship missiles, the DF-21D carrier killer, the Zircon hypersonic cruise missile? Those weapons represent the outer edge of what SeaRAM was designed to face. Whether it can stop them, truly stop them, is a question that hasn't been answered in public. And perhaps most unsettling, if SeaRAM is what they're willing to tell us about, what's still classified? Military technology programs work in layers. The weapon systems that make headlines are rarely the most advanced ones. What we see is almost always a generation behind what's actually being tested. SeaRAM may be the most capable ship defense system ever deployed at scale. Or it may be the decoy, the public face of a much deeper program that no one outside a handful of cleared facilities will know about for another 20 years. What do you think? Is this enough? Or has the